Chapter 14 of Book 4 of Physics by Aristotle, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 14. It now remains, as consequent to what has been said, that we should speak concerning time. In the first place, then, it will be well to doubt concerning it, through exoteric reasons, whether it ranks among beings or among nonentities, and, in the next place, to consider what its nature is. That time, therefore, in short, is not, or that it scarcely and obscurely is, may be suspected from the following considerations. One part of it was, and is not. Another part is future, and is not yet, but from these parts, infinite time, and which is always assumed, is composed. That, however, which is composed from things that are not, does not appear to be ever capable of participating of essence, to which may be added, it is necessary, with respect to everything partible, if it should have a subsistence, that either some or all of its parts should be when it is. But of time, some of the parts are past, others are future, and no part is in consequence of time being divisible. But the now, or an instant, is not a part of time, for a part measures, and it is necessary that the whole should be composed from the parts, but time does not appear to be composed from instants. Besides, with respect to this now, which appears to bound and separate the past and the future, whether it always remains one and the same, or is another and another, it is not easy to see. For if it is always another and another, but there is no part of time which is at once another, and of which one part does not comprehend, and another is comprehended, just as the less is comprehended by the greater time, but that which now is not, but was before, must necessarily once have perished. If this be the case, instants cannot subsist together with each other, but the prior instant must always have necessarily perished. It is not possible, therefore, that it can have perished in itself, because it then is. Neither is it possible that a prior now can perish in another now. For let it be impossible for instants to adhere to each other in the same manner as it is impossible for a point to adhere to a point. If, therefore, it does not perish in that which is successive, but in another, it will at one and the same time be in the intermediate instants which are infinite. But this is impossible. Neither is it possible for the same instant always to remain, for there is not one boundary of any finite divisible thing, neither if it should be continuous to one thing, nor if to many. But the now is a boundary, and a finite time may be assumed. Again, if a simultaneous subsistence according to time, and to be neither prior nor posterior, is nothing else than to be in the same, and in an instant, in this case, if those things which are prior and posterior are in the same now, the transactions of 1,000 years past will subsist together with those which are accomplished today, and one thing will not be prior or posterior to another. Such, then, are the doubts concerning the particulars which belong to time. Chapter 15. But what time is, and what is its nature, from what has been delivered, is similarly immanifest with the things which we have before discussed. For some say that it is the motion of the universe, but others that it is the sphere itself. A part, however, of the revolution of the universe is a certain time, but it is not a revolution, for that which is assumed is a part of the revolution, and not the revolution. Again, if there were many heavens, time would be similarly the motion of any one of these, so that there would be many times subsisting together. But the sphere of the universe seemed to those who made that assertion to be time, because all things are in time and in the sphere of the universe. This assertion, however, is so stupid that it is not requisite to consider the impossibilities with which it is attended. But since time especially appears to be motion and mutation, this must be considered. The mutation, therefore, and motion of everything is in that alone which is changed, or wherever that may be which is moved and changed. But time is similarly everywhere, and with all things. Besides, every mutation is swifter and slower, but time is not. For the slow and the swift are defined by time, since that is swift which is much moved in a short time, and that is slow which is but a little moved in a long time. But time is not defined by time, neither because it is a certain quantity, nor because it is a certain quality. It is evident, therefore, that time is not motion. But there is no difference whether at present we say it is not motion, or that it is not mutation. Chapter 16. Neither, however, is time without mutation. For when there is no change in our thoughts, or if there is, but we are ignorant of it, then it does not appear to us that any time has elapsed, as neither did it to those in Sardis, who are fabled to have slept with the heroes when they awoke. For they conjoined the prior with the posterior now, and made them to be one, not taking into account the intermediate time, through not having had a sensible perception of it. As, therefore, if there were no other now, but one and the same, there would be no time. Thus also, when it is concealed from us that there is a different time, then the intermediate time does not appear to exist. If, therefore, it then happens to us that we do not imagine there is time when we do not distinguish any mutation, but the soul appears to remain in one and an indivisible, but when we sensibly perceive and distinguish mutation, then we say there has been time. If this be the case, it is evident that time is not without motion and mutation. But since we investigate what time is, let us assume, beginning from hence, what it is belonging to motion. For together with motion, we have also a sensible perception of time. For even in darkness, and when we are passive to nothing through the body, if there is nevertheless a certain motion in the soul, there immediately also appears to have been some time. But when likewise some time appears to have elapsed together with this, there seems also to have been some motion, so that time is either motion or something belonging to motion. Since, therefore, it is not motion, it is necessary that it should be something belonging to motion. But since that which is moved from something to something, and since all magnitude is continuous, motion is consequent to magnitude. For because magnitude is continuous, motion also is continuous, and because motion, also time, for as much motion as there was, so much time likewise always appears to have elapsed. But prior and posterior primarily subsist in place, and here indeed in the position of the parts. Since, however, there are prior and posterior in magnitude, it is also necessary that these should be in motion, analogous to the prior and posterior which are there. Moreover, there are also prior and posterior in time, because one of these is always consequent to the other. But the prior and posterior of these do not in reality differ from motion, but only in essence and definition. We likewise know time when we give a boundary to motion, distinguishing prior and posterior, and we then say there has been time when we receive a sensible perception of prior and posterior in motion. But we distinguish them by apprehending these to be another and another, and also by conceiving that there is something between, different from these. For when we understand that the extremes are different from the middle, and the soul says that there are two instants, the one prior and the other posterior, then we say that this is time, for that which is bounded by instants appears to be time. And let this be admitted. When, therefore, we have a sensible perception of the now as one, and there is not anything as prior and posterior in motion, or when we perceive it as the same, and not belonging to a certain prior and posterior, then there does not appear to have been any time, because neither was there any motion. But when we perceive prior and posterior, then we say there is time, for time is this, the number of motion according to prior and posterior. Time, therefore, is not motion, unless so far as motion has number, an indication of which is this, that we judge of the more and the less by number, but of a greater and less motion by time. Time, therefore, is a certain number. Since, however, number is twofold, for we call both that which is numbered, and that which is numerable, number, and also that by which we number, time is that which is numbered, and not that by which we number. But that by which we number is different from that which is numbered. Chapter 17. And as there is always another and another motion, so likewise with respect to time. But the whole of time, considered as subsisting at once, is the same. For the now is in reality one and the same, but its essence is different. The now, however, measures time so far as it is prior and posterior. The now also subsists as partly the same and partly not the same, for so far as it is in another and another, it is different, but this was the now itself. But so far as the now is that which it once was, so far it is the same. For, as we have said, motion is consequent to magnitude, and time to motion. In a similar manner also, that which is borne along is consequent to a point, by which we recognize motion, and the prior and posterior in it. But this is in reality the same, for it is either a point, or a stone, or something else of this kind, but is different in definition, just as the sophists assumed that Coriscus in the Lyceum is different from Coriscus in the Forum, and this also is different because it is in a different and a different place. But the now is consequent to that which is borne along, in the same manner as time to motion. For by that which is borne along we know prior and posterior in motion, but the now is, so far as prior and posterior are numerable. So that in these a real instant is the same, for that which is in motion is either prior or posterior, but the essence is different, because the now is, so far as prior and posterior are numerable. And this is especially known, for motion is known through that which is moved, and lation through that which is borne along. For that which is borne along is this particular thing, but this is not the case with motion. That which is called the now, therefore, is partly the same and partly not the same, for the like also may be said of that which is borne along. But it is also evident that whether time is not, there will not be the now, or whether the now is not, time will not be. For as that which is borne along and lation subsist together, so likewise the number of that which is borne along, and the number of the lation. For time is the number of lation, but the now, with respect to that which is borne along, is as the monad to number. Time also is continued through the now, and is divided according to the now. For according to this, time and the now are consequent to lation, and the thing which is borne along. For motion and lation are one with that which is borne along, because it is one, and not according to that which is, for it may fail, but also in definition. And this bounds prior and posterior motion. According to this also, it is in a certain respect consequent to a point. For a point also, in a certain respect, connects and bounds length, since it is the beginning of one length and the end of another. When, however, any one thus considers it, using one point as if it were two, it is necessary to stop if the same point will be the beginning and end. But the now, because that which is borne along is moved, is always different. Hence, time is a number, not as of the same point, because it is both beginning and end, but rather as the extremities of a line, and not as parts, for the reason already assigned. For it uses the middle point as 2 points, whence it happens that it rests. And further still, it is evident that neither is the now a part of time, nor division a part of motion, as neither are points parts of a line, but two lines are parts of one line. So far, therefore, as the now is a boundary, it is not time, but an accident of time, but so far as it numbers, it is number. For boundaries belong to that only of which they are the boundaries. But the number which is of these horses, as for instance the decad, has also a subsistence elsewhere. Chapter 18. That time, therefore, is the number of motion according to prior and posterior, and that it is continued, for it is of the continuous, is evident. The least number, however, simply considered, is the duad. But a certain number is partly the least and partly not. As, for instance, of a line, the least number is in multitude 2, or 1. But there is not a least in magnitude, for every line is always divisible. Hence also, similarly, time. For 1 or 2 is the least according to number, but is not according to magnitude. It is also evident why time is not said to be swift and slow, but much and few, and long and short. For so far as it is continued, it is long and short. But so far as it is number, it is much and few. It is not, however, swift and slow, for neither is any number with which we numerate swift and slow. The same time also is everywhere at once. But prior and posterior are not the same, because with respect to mutation, the present indeed is one, but the past and future are different. But time is number, not that with which we numerate, but that which is numbered. And this happens according to prior and posterior to be always different, for the instants are different. The number is also one and the same of 100 horses, and 100 men. But the things to which the number belongs are different, viz., the horses and the men. Further still, as it happens that motion is one and the same again and again, so also it happens with respect to time, as for instance the year, the spring, or the autumn. We not only, however, measure motion by time, but time by motion, because they are bounded by each other. For time bounds motion, since it is the number of it, and motion bounds time. And we say that time is much or few, measuring it by motion, in the same manner as we measure number by that which is numerable, as for instance, by one horse the number of horses. For by number we know the multitude of horses, and again by one horse we know the number of the horses. The like also happens in time and motion, for by time we measure motion, and by motion time. And this happens reasonably, for motion is consequent to magnitude, and time to motion, because these are quantities, and are continuous and divisible. For because the magnitude is such, the motion suffers these things, and time because of the motion. And we measure magnitude by motion, and motion by magnitude. For we say that the way is long if the journey is long, and that this is long if the way is long. We also say that the time is long if the motion is much, and that the motion is much if the time is long. Chapter 19. Since, however, time is the measure of motion and of being moved, and it measures motion by giving a definite extent to a certain motion which measures the whole, just as a yard measures length by giving a definite extent to a certain magnitude which measures the whole. This being the case, for motion to be in time is nothing else than for time to measure it, and its essence. For at the same time it measures motion, and the essence of motion. And this it is for motion to be in time, viz., for time to measure its essence. But it is evident that this it is also for other things to be in time, viz., for their essence to be measured by time. For to have a subsistence in time is one of two things, one of which is, then, to be when time is, and the other, just as we say that certain things are in number. And this signifies either as a part and property of number, and in short, that it is something belonging to number, or that it is the number of it. But since time is number, the now, the prior, and things of this kind are so in time, as the monad, the even, and the odd are in number. For these are something belonging to number, and those are something belonging to time, but things are in time as in number. If this, then, is the case, things are comprehended by number in the same manner as things in place are comprehended by place. It is also evident that to be in time is not then to be when time is, as neither to be in motion, nor to be in place is then to be when motion and place are. For if a subsistence in anything were of this kind, all things would be in anything whatever, and heaven would be in a grain of millet. For where a grain of millet is, the heaven also is, but this is an accidental circumstance. That, however, necessarily follows, viz., that to a thing which is in time there is a certain time when that thing is, and that to a thing in motion there is then motion. But since that which is in time is as in number, a certain time may be assumed greater than everything which is in time. Hence it is necessary that all things which are in time should be comprehended by time, just as other things which are comprehended in anything, as for instance, that which is in place by place. Hence that which is in time will suffer something from time, just as we are accustomed to say that time consumes, that all things grow old from time, and are forgotten through time, but nothing learns, nor becomes young, nor beautiful through time. For time is of itself rather the cause of corruption, because it is the number of motion, and motion removes that which exists from its state or condition. So that it is evident that eternal beings, so far as they are eternal, are not in time, for they are not comprehended by time, nor is their being measured by time. As a token of the truth of this, they do not suffer anything by, as not being in time. But since time is the measure of motion, it is also the measure of rest according to accident. For all rest is in time. For it does not follow that as that which is in motion must necessarily be moved, so also that which is in time, since time is not motion, but the number of motion. But in the number of motion there may also be that which is at rest. For not everything immovable is at rest, but that is at rest which is deprived of motion when it is naturally adapted to be moved, as we have before observed. But to be a number is nothing else than to be some number of a thing, and to have its being measured by the number in which it is, so that if a thing is in time, its essence is measured by time. But time measures both that which is in motion and that which is at rest, so far as the former is in motion and the latter at rest. For it measures the quantity of their motion and rest, so that what is in motion will not simply be measured by time, so far as it is a certain quantity, but so far as its motion is so much. Hence, such things as are neither in motion nor at rest are not in time, since to be in time is to be measured by time, and time is the measure of motion and rest. It is evident, therefore, that neither is everything which is not in time, as, for instance, such things as cannot subsist otherwise, as that the diameter of a square should be commensurate with its side. For, in short, if time is essentially the measure of motion, but of other things according to accident, it is evident that the essence of all such things as time measures consists in being at rest, or in motion. Whatever, therefore, is corrupted and generated, and in short at one time is, and at another time is not, is necessarily in time. For there is a certain greater time which exceeds their essence, and the time that measures their essence. But of things which are not, such as time comprehends, partly have been, as Homer once was, and partly will be, as is the case with anything future. These time comprehends on both sides, and if on both sides they were and will be. But such things as time does not at all comprehend, these neither were, nor are, nor will be, and of this kind are those non-beings, the opposites of which always are. Thus that the diameter of a square is incommensurable with its side always is, and this will not be in time. Neither therefore will it be in time for it to be commensurable. Hence it always is not, because it is contrary to that which always is. But those things the contrary to which is not always, these may both be and not be, and of these there is generation and corruption. Again, the now is the conjunction of time, as has been observed, for it connects the time past and future, and in short is the boundary of time. For it is the beginning of one time, and the end of another, though this is evidently not as in an abiding point. But it divides in capacity, and the now, so far as it is such, is always different. But so far as it connects, it is always the same, just as in mathematical lines. For there is not always one and the same point in intellectual conception, because to those who divide there is always another and another. But so far as it is one line, there is entirely the same point. Thus also the now is partly a division of time according to capacity, and partly the boundary and union of both. Division too and union are the same and according to the same, but their essence is not the same. In this manner, therefore, one of the nows is said to be, but another now is said to be when the time belonging to this now is near. For some one came now because he came today, or he came now because he came yesterday. But the Trojan transactions are not performed now, nor does a deluge take place now, though time is continued as far as to those events, because they are not near. The once, however, is time bounded with reference to a former now, as for instance Troy was once captured, and once there will be a deluge, for it is necessary to be bounded with reference to the now. There will therefore be a certain quantity from this time as far as to that, and it was with reference to the past. But if there is no time which has not connection with the once, every time will be finite. Will time therefore fail, or will it not, since motion always is? Will there then be a different time, or the same time frequently? It is manifest that as is motion, so also is time. For if one and the same motion is once produced, there will be one and the same time. But if not, there will not be. But since the now is the end and beginning of time, yet not of the same time, but is the end of the past and the beginning of the future, this being the case, just as a circle in a certain respect contains in the same the convex and the concave, thus also time always is in the beginning and end, and on this account it always appears to be different, for the now is not the beginning and end of the same time, since if this were the case, opposites would subsist together, and according to the same. Hence time will not fail, for it is always in the beginning, but the presently, or just now, is that which is near to the present indivisible now, since it is a part of the future time. For instance, when will you walk? Presently, because the time is near in which this will come to pass, and the past time in which it happened is not remote from the present now. For instance, when will you walk? I have already just now walked. But we do not say that Troy was just now captured, because the time when this happened is very remote from the present now. The lately also is near the present now, and is a part of the past time. For instance, when did you come? Lately is the answer if the time was near to the present now. The formerly is remote time, and the suddenly is asserted of that which is removed from its condition, in a time which is insensible through its smallness. But all mutation naturally possesses the power of altering the condition of a thing, and all things are generated and corrupted in time. Hence, some have called time the wisest of things, but the Pythagorean Paran, speaking more accurately, calls it most unwise, because things are forgotten in it. It is evident, therefore, that time of itself is rather the cause of corruption than generation, as we have observed before, for mutation possesses from itself a power of removing a thing from its condition, but is the cause of generation and being according to accident. As a sufficient token of this, nothing is generated without itself in a certain respect moving and acting, but a thing may be corrupted which is not at all moved, and this corruption we are accustomed especially to ascribe to time. Time, however, does not produce this, but it happens that this mutation is effected in time. We have shown, therefore, that time is, and what it is, and in how many ways we speak of the now, and what the once is, the lately, the just now, the formerly, and the suddenly. Chapter 20. These things, therefore, being thus enumerated by us, it is evident that every mutation is necessarily made in time, and that everything which is moved in time, for the swifter and the slower are in all mutation, since in all things this is apparent. But I say that a thing is moved swifter, which prior to something else changed into a subject, being moved according to the same interval, and with an equable motion, as for instance in lation, if both are moved in a circumference, or both in a right line. The like also takes place in other things. The prior also is in time, for we speak of the prior and posterior according to distance, with reference to the present now. But the present now is the boundary of the past and future time, so that since nows are in time prior and posterior also will be in time. For in that in which the now is, in that also is the distance from the now. But the prior is spoken of in a contrary manner according to the time past and future. For in the time past we call that prior which is more remote from the present now, but we call that posterior which is nearer to it. But in the future that is prior which is nearer, and that is posterior which is more remote. Hence, since the prior is in time, but the prior is consequent to all motion, it is evident that all mutation and all motion are in time. It deserves also to be considered how time subsists with reference to soul, and why time appears to be in everything, in the earth, in the sea, and in the heavens. Shall we say it is because time is a certain passive quality or habit of motion, since it is the number of it? But all these things are movable, for all these are in place, and time and motion subsist together, both according to capacity and according to energy. It may, however, be doubted whether, if soul were not, time would be or not. For when it is impossible for that which numerates to be, it is also impossible that there should be anything numerable. So that it is manifest that neither can there be number, for number is either that which is numbered, or that which is numerable. However, if nothing else than soul and the intellect of soul are naturally adapted to numerate, it is impossible for time to be when soul is not, unless time is that which is in reality and in a subject. As, for instance, it may be doubted if it be possible for motion to be without soul. But prior and posterior are in motion, and time is these so far as they are numerable. It may also be doubted of what kind of motion time is the number, or whether it is the number of every kind of motion. For a thing is generated, corrupted, increased, changed in quality, and borne along in time. So far, therefore, as each of these is motion, time is the number of every motion. Hence it is simply the number of continued motion, and not of a certain motion. But it is possible that something else may be now moved, of the motion of each of which there will be a number. Will there then be a different time, and will there be at once two equal times, or will there not? For all time is one, similar, and at once, but things are one in species which do not subsist at the same time. For if these should be dogs, but those horses, and both should be 7, there will be the same number. Thus also there is the same time of motions which are finished together, but the one is perhaps swift, and the other not, and the one lation, but the other change according to quality. Time, however, is the same, since the number is equal and subsists at once, both of the change according to quality and the lation. Hence the motions are different and separate, but time is everywhere the same, because the number is one, and everywhere the same of things equal, and which subsist at once. But since there is lation, and motion in a circle belongs to this, and since everything is numbered by a certain kindred one, as monads by the monad, and horses by a horse, this being the case, time also is numbered by a certain definite time. But time, as we have said, is measured by motion, and motion by time, and this is because the quantity both of motion and time is measured by a definite motion in time. If, therefore, that which is first is the measure of all kindred natures, equable circulation will be especially a measure, because the number of this is most known. Change according to quality, therefore, increase, and generation are not equable, but lation is equable. Hence time appears to be the motion of the celestial sphere, because other motions, and time itself, are measured by this motion. Hence, too, that happens which is usually said, for they say that human affairs are a circle, and also that the generation and lation of other things which have a natural motion is circular. And this is because all these things are judged of by time, and receive an end and beginning, as it were, according to a certain period. For time itself appears to be a certain circle, and this again appears to be so, because time is the measure of a lation of this kind, and is itself measured by such a lation. So that to say that things generated are a circle is nothing more than to say that there is a certain circle of time, and this because time is measured by circulation. For except that which measures, the whole of that which is measured appears to be nothing else than many measures. It is also rightly said that the number is the same of sheep and dogs, if each number is equal, but there is not the same decad, nor the same tens, as neither are the equilateral and the scalene the same triangles, though the figure is the same, because both are triangles. For that is said to be the same by the difference of which it does not differ, but not that by the difference of which it differs. Thus, for instance, triangle differs by the difference of triangle, and hence there are different triangles. But figure does not differ by the difference of figure, but is in one and the same division. For a figure of such a nature is a circle, and such a figure is a triangle. And of this, that which is of such a nature is equilateral, but that which is of a different nature is scalene. Hence this, indeed, is the same figure, for it is a triangle, but the triangle is not the same. The number also is the same, for the number of these does not differ by the difference of number. But the decad is not the same, for the things of which it is said to be the decad differ, since some of these are dogs, and others horses. And thus much concerning time, as well itself as the things which pertain to, and are peculiar to, the consideration of it. End of Book 4. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.